Good evening. The sunset does not only praise UFOs and highlight their most flattering features, it even prostrates itself before the UFOs. Is the sun our true high god? If so, then he now bows before us, blushing with deep shame. Naughty, naughty, Mr. Sun. Did you forget that the sky is my sugar daddy? And he would have no shame in wielding his giant, well-battened zeppelin against you, just like a regular Magonian. That's right, Mr. Sun. You better bow. Because as we'll see tonight, animals behave badly when your lights go out. Plus, I'm feeling very gassy, and very swampy. Swampily gassy. I wonder what J. Allen Hynek would say. The truth is nice, but what about just dropping truth by the wayside? How would this affect our intelligence? And the phenomenon that is the every action of Joe Rogan somehow still persists, a scientific quandary of our times. All this and more tonight. I'm Rachel Nelson.
I'm Jeff Knox.
I'm Luis Cayetano.
Welcome to Ufo Sunset. And now for the rebrief. The U.S. Should we exterminate 500,000 barred owls? The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service published a report last November outlining a plan to preserve the northern and California spotted owls who live in old-growth forests in British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California. The plan, if successful, would result in the extermination of some 500,000 barred owls. Spotted owls are threatened both because of the loss of forest habitats and also because of the encroachment of the larger and more competitive barred owls from the eastern United States. According to NPR, Claire Catania, who's the director of Birds Connect in Seattle, Washington, and who supports the plan, says that the barred owls have spread to western states because of human-caused damage to ecosystems. On March 25th, a letter signed by numerous animal welfare advocates and organizations was sent to the Secretary of Interior opposing the plan. According to the letter, the plan is impractical and doomed to fail, while also introducing harm to other bird species. The authors point, for example, to the dangers of introducing lead fragments from ammunition into local ecosystems, which they argue will lead to the deaths of eagles, doves, and other animals. An airship ferry takes to the air. China's AS-700 civil manned airship named Xiangun, excuse my pronunciation, took its first flight on April 1st in Hubei province, Xinhua News Agency reported. The airship flew from Jiangmen Airport to an airport in Jingzhou, taking 1 hour and 46 minutes. Having received a type certificate last year, the AS-700 was engineered by the Aviation Industry Corporation of China, or AVIC. According to the pilot of the Xiangun, Lin Hong, the flight proceeded as planned. The ship is able to land and take off vertically on a narrow landing strip. It also has a carrying capacity of over 4,000 kilograms, enough for 10 passengers, a flight range of 700 kilometers, and a top speed of 100 kilometers per hour. China News Service reported that AVIC has already received 20 orders for new AS-700 airships. Animals will behave strangely, and some clouds may disappear. On Monday, a total solar eclipse will cross North America during the morning and early afternoon. The eclipse will begin in the Pacific Ocean, arrive in Mazatlan, Mexico, at shortly after 11 a.m., cross central Mexico, Texas, and much of the eastern United States, and then enter the Atlantic Ocean after passing through Newfoundland at around 12:45 p.m. A partial solar eclipse will also reach Great Britain and Ireland. Because the moon is closer to the Earth currently, the path of this eclipse across the Earth's surface will be wider than the annular eclipse of October 2023, which we reported on last year, as well as the total eclipse that crossed the US in 2017. This eclipse will also be crossing more populated areas. This means more people may have a chance to see it, weather permitting. Weather forecasts in the eastern US predict that there will be clouds covering much of the eclipse's path, but according to a study published in February in Nature Communications, Earth and Environment, this may not matter for some people watching. This study found that even when the sun is only partially covered by the moon, it can cause cumulus clouds to dissipate. These are small white puffy clouds that form at low altitude. The lead author of the study is Victor Tres, a doctoral candidate from the Department of Geoscience and Remote Sensing at Delft University of Technology, which is in the Netherlands. According to Tres, this effect happens as Earth's surface begins to cool under the moon's shadow, preventing warm, moist air from rising from the ground and cutting off the source of cloud formation, the Houston Chronicle reported. This effect doesn't work for all clouds, but only cumulus clouds that form low over the Earth's surface. Thick rain clouds and clouds at higher altitudes will not be noticeably affected, but they may still be thin enough in some places for people to see the eclipse through the cloud cover. One might also expect to see unusual behavior on the part of animal behaviorists caused by the temporary darkness, unusual scientific research behavior. According to Scientific American, separate teams led by biologists Rebecca Johnson at the California Academy of Sciences and Adam Hartstone Rose at North Carolina State University will both be gathering data on animal behavior during the eclipse. During 2017, Adam Hartstone Rose and his team examined the behavior of rainbow and coconut lorikeets, along with 15 other animal species, at the Riverbanks Zoo in South Carolina. The team found three main responses from animals. One, as in the case of lorikeets, was behaving as though night had fallen, going through a routine of night behavior, then responding to the end of the eclipse as though morning had arrived. Other animals responded with apparent anxiety, while still others showed no response at all. Meanwhile, some Galapagos tortoises responded by mating with each other. Also, all of the tortoises stared up at the sky after totality. This team will be conducting another study during this coming eclipse at the Fort Worth Zoo in Texas. Meanwhile, Rebecca Johnson is a co-director of the California Academy of Sciences Community Science Department and uses the iNaturalist app to collect data about animal behavior from the public, especially domestic animals such as pets, as well as honeybees, among others. And researchers at Indiana University Bloomington, including Kimberly Rosval and Liz Aguilar, are using an app called SolarBird for bird research. This will allow citizens to report anomalous bird behavior during the eclipse. As with the lorikeets at the Riverbanks Zoo, many birds are thought to respond to the eclipse as though night has fallen. The Indiana University researchers hope to learn more about how eclipses affect bird migration and social interaction. And now, for Mr. Jeff Knox.
Hello. Before I start, I just want to point out I just found this on my shelf right here. It's a book I bought during the 2017 solar eclipse that had this cool alien bookmark in it. I'm disappointed I'm not going to be able to see from one of the cool viewing spots for this eclipse, but anyways, all right. Bear with me. I'm going to do it a little different than before. I'm going to control my own slides this time. So let's see how I can do this. Today we're going to talk about some of the significant events during the swamp gas incident in 1966 in the Dexter, Hillsdale, kind of Ann Arbor and surrounding area of Michigan, and how those events kind of eventually led to the first public congressional hearing just 2 weeks later, that then eventually led to the Condon Project. We will start off. Now, most people, when they think of the Michigan sighting, they think of the most famous case, which is the Frank Manor sighting that we'll talk about next. But the events actually kind of started on March 14th, when a bunch of sheriffs in multiple counties saw multiple discs. Let's see here. March 15th. So at 3:30 to 5:30 a.m., Washtenaw County Sheriff's deputies Buford Bushrow and John Foster see highly maneuverable disc-shaped UFOs with flashing red and green lights over Dexter, Michigan. They call in a report that sets off a 2.5-hour chase that stretches over 3 counties and out over Lake Erie. Police from 5 jurisdictions end up being involved. Selfridge Air Force Base, now Selfridge Air National Guard Base near Mount Clemens, reports tracking UFOs on radar over Lake Erie. Now, there'd be a couple of more events over the next couple of days. There was another incident with police on March 17th, where an officer ended up taking a photo that was actually just a blurry photo of like the crescent moon and Venus. But the first major event, the event that most people know about, the infamous swamp gas case, happened on March 20th in 1966 in Dexter Township, Michigan. So at 7:30 p.m., Frank Manor, he's hanging out with his family, his extended family, having dinner, when the dogs start making a racket and making a bunch of noise. He says that's unusual. His dogs don't make rackets very often. And so him and his son, his 26-year-old son, Ronald, go to investigate. Now, they end up seeing some strange lights over a swampy area. They walk over to the area to take a look, taking about 30 minutes, and they see a pyramidal-shaped object with a rounded top, corrugated surface, and blue, red, and kind of white lights. This is Life magazine published an article where they published this kind of recreation of what they kind of believed what Frank Manor saw at the time. Now, Manor's this pyramidal object was round, corrugated surface, blue, red, and white lights. Manor's son-in-law, Bob Wagner, back at the house, he sees the object light up and rise 500 feet, then come back again, making some noise. Washtenaw County Sheriff's deputies David Fitzpatrick and Stanley McFadden arrive at about 9 p.m., driving towards the swamp on Quigley Road. They see a bright light that dims and then reappears. By this time, a crowd has gathered. One man reports that when 2 flash lights appear in the distance, the object seems to react to them and flies away at a high speed. At another point, the object passes directly over the Manor's house again, and they hear a whistling sound like a rifle bullet ricocheting. It remains in the swampy area for about 30 minutes. The next day, we have the Hillsdale College sighting, or the Van Horn sighting, that took place in Hillsdale, Michigan. And it started off at 10:32 p.m. Cynthia, nicknamed Pinky Poffenberger, and 16 other Hillsdale, Michigan college students see a football-shaped object. This is a drawing actually drawn by one of the students. They see a football-shaped object with red, green, and white pulsating lights descend from the sky and pass close to their dorm. It settles in a hollow in the Slayton Arboretum about 1,500 feet away. Some 87 different students end up collecting in the dorms to end up watching this UFO. Then they notify Civil Defense Director William Van Horn, who you'll sometimes see just referred to as Bud Van Horn. It seems everyone in this story has a nickname. And he arrives with the police. From the dormitory, the landed lights appear yellowish, dimming, white, and intensifying. Only the student Barbara Cohn, who also goes by Gidget in most of the documents, Barbara Cohn stays almost most of the night watching the lights vanish, reappear, and then recede. At about 5:10 a.m., Cohn sees a lighted object move away and disappear from sight. Radiation is later detected at the landing area of about 330 to 600 microrengens per hour, roughly 10 to 20 times the background level. Now, those measurements were recorded by a 15-year-old and 16-year-old boy, which isn't to say they were wrong, but you would have thought perhaps they would have had somebody more qualified end up analyzing the results. Now, they ended up bringing Hynek in. One of the officers, an Officer Harvey, ended up speaking to a local congressional representative of his, Vivian Weston, I believe her name was, or Weston Vivian. And she basically pressured the Air Force into investigating the case, her and Ford, and they sent J. Allen Hynek to investigate. So he shows up a couple days later to investigate. And he ends up talking to quite a few people. He mostly chooses to focus on those two main events, the Frank Manor sighting of the 19th and the Hillsdale College sighting, and not any of the earlier or later events that people see. So you see, he talked to a lot. He ended up speaking to a lot of the sheriffs. He spoke to the Manors. He ended up speaking to two of the women. Part of that, I believe, is because the house mom would only allow him to speak to two of the women. But one of the women ended up drawing that image we saw earlier. That was a Miss Jo Wilson, incorrectly spelled by Hynek as Joe with an E. And this leads to the most infamous kind of thing that's kind of had ripples all throughout ufology, the swamp gas press conference that would take place a couple days later on March 25th. So on March 25th, so Quintanilla needed quick answers, so he schedules a press conference at Selfridge Air Force Base, now Selfridge Air National Guard Base near Mount Clemens, Michigan, for Hynek to make a statement. Now, I'll point out Quintanilla actually disputes this. He claims Hynek asked for the press conference, not the other way around, which doesn't actually make any sense. I think Quintanilla is probably just kind of flat wrong about that. But so Quintanilla asked for this press conference that Hynek kind of gets pressured into giving a statement. Hynek, disappointed with the quality of the sightings and suspecting a mundane explanation, ends up announcing, quote, "It would seem to me that the association of the sightings with swamps in these particular cases is more than coincidence. No group of witnesses observed any craft coming to or going away from the swamps. The glow was localized there. It appears to me that all the major conditions for the appearances of swamp lights were satisfied." So this is how we got the swamp gas theory. Now, the swamp gas theory obviously doesn't go over very well with the witnesses or the media or the public, who kind of feel that they're being belittled. We end up getting a lot of swamp gas comics that throughout the years kind of making fun of the whole swamp gas thing. And swamp gas is probably like the main kind of joke, people, that and weather balloon, that people jump to when you think of, like, you know, ridiculing a UFO sighting. It's kind of stuck with us throughout all that time, you know. But you know, a lot of people, the Bud Van Horn, I'll point out, he was one of the people that got mad over this, that it couldn't be swamp gas, and kind of blamed Hynek for putting that out there. But the part of the problem with that is, it's actually Bud Van Horn is the guy that put swamp gas in Hynek's mind in the first place, because he actually said at first he thought it was swamp gas. In fact, there was over a dozen people Hynek talked to, and the people he interviewed, that all mentioned at one point they thought it was swamp gas. So it is not actually that he pulled this up out of the blue as some way to debunk it. It was actually suggested by many of the witnesses that that's what they initially thought it might be. Now, that's probably not a very likely explanation, but you can't put all the blame on Hynek, unfortunately, and he was sort of pressured into giving that statement. Obviously, that press conference happened just days after the sightings happened, and he didn't even get there till a few days later. So he had barely had time to investigate. He had limited resources. He was pressured into giving an answer, and swamp gas was something that was suggested to him, and so he looked into it, and it seemed feasible. This would end up, now on the very same day as the press conference, Gerald Ford, who was the Republican congressman in Michigan, would issue a press release proposing that Congress investigate a rash of UFO reports in southern Michigan and the rest of the country. He thinks that the American people would feel better if there was a full-blown investigation of these incidents, which some people allege to have taken place. This would lead to him just 3 days later, again on the 28th, again recommending an investigation. He ends up writing to George P. Miller, who is a Democrat from California, chairman of the House Science and Astronautics Committee, and L. Mendel Rivers, who is a Democrat from South Carolina and chairman of the Armed Services Committee, saying that he is dissatisfied with Hynek's explanation of the Michigan sightings. He states that in the firm belief that the American public deserves a better explanation than that thus far given by the Air Force, I strongly recommend that there be a House committee investigation of the UFO phenomenon. I think we owe it to the people to establish credibility regarding UFOs and to produce the greatest possible enlightenment on this subject, end quote. Now, while a full-blown congressional investigation like requested was never actually launched, we did get the first public congressional hearing on UFOs, would take place on April 5th, 1966. This is just 2 weeks after these events happened, conducted by the House Armed Services Committee. Air Force Secretary Harold Brown testifies that, sorry, lost my place here. Harold Brown testifies that while the Air Force has done an excellent job on UFOs, perhaps there's room for even stronger emphasis on the scientific aspects. Hynek recommends that a civilian panel of physical and social scientists examine the UFO problem critically for the express purpose of determining whether a major problem exists. Quintanilla is the only other witness. After committee chairman L. Mendel Rivers expresses some enthusiasm for the idea, Brown suddenly realizes that maybe he has found a way to get the Air Force out of UFO investigations. Shortly after the hearing, Brown would tell the U.S. Air Force Office of Scientific Research to accept the February 3rd proposal that was put forth by the O'Brien Committee, which is the Scientific Advisory Board, that recommended that they find a university willing to accept a contract to study the 600 officially unidentified UFO sightings. Now, it would actually not be that easy of a job. Finding a university that was willing to take on this task would prove to be quite difficult. They would shop this contract around to a few universities like MIT, Harvard, the University of California, the University of North Carolina. In fact, they shopped it to, I believe, at least 25 different universities, and they all declined. None of them basically were interested in involving themselves in the UFO topic. So eventually, after the task of trying to find a university gets passed between a couple people, they end up getting the University of Colorado involved in kind of a roundabout way. First, they approach, I believe, one of the observatories, and they don't really want to do it, but they talk to somebody else there in Denver or Boulder, and the university ends up taking on the project. And basically 3 months later, 3 months after this congressional hearing, on October 7th, the Condon Project gets announced to the public in a press release. And that's basically what I have for you guys today. It's an interesting and important part. There's some other aftermath. This is kind of the case that they say made Hynek kind of changed Hynek's mind about the UFO phenomenon, kind of turned him, I guess, more believer, more pro, or more that there's something to it, a little less skeptical. I guess he wasn't satisfied with the Air Force, and he wasn't satisfied with the swamp gas answer that he was kind of forced into giving. So that's what I got for you guys this week. Rachel or Louise?
Hi, everyone. Well, let's just wait for the slides to come up on my part. Oh, here we go. So I'm going to talk about some things to do with national security and the cybersecurity landscape. And I guess some of this is relevant to UAP and UFOs to an extent. But it's more to do with the general landscape of disinformation and fake news and information manipulation and warfare, especially by America's adversaries. Now, Michael Hayden is the author of this book, The Assault on Intelligence. I'm sorry, I can't really see very well today. That's why I'm squinting. He wrote this book, and it's about, well, his time in the NSA and CIA as director. And the things that he saw as he was kind of coming into the Trump period, some of the frictions between the IC and the Trump administration, and the burgeoning of fake news, sort of careless statements by the Trump administration, and Russian disinformation, but also Chinese disinformation as well, which is a thing that I'll talk about more in a second. Now, Michael Hayden is, he's got his own controversies surrounding him, but I still recommend that everybody read this book. I think it's a very important book in this landscape. We can go to the next slide, please. This is a very important book. This was published last year. Battlefield Cyber. It's by two cybersecurity professionals. They are really blowing the horn on, or raising the alarm, I should say. That's a better analogy. On the adversaries of America, so namely Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, using cyber tools to try to undermine American democracy, faith in constitutional government, trying to deepen divisions already present in American society, and things of this sort, okay? And also, of course, espionage. The Chinese have engaged in large-scale industrial espionage by hacking into American defense networks and other infrastructure to get blueprints, for example, for various weapon systems that they then copy, but also stealing data from American citizens using things like Zoom and other platforms, and also using TikTok, which is a popular social media platform. But you can get a lot of data from people using AI algorithms and using correlation studies to see like who associates with who and things of that sort. This has got national security implications because, you might, for example, be able to see where a US service person is present, but looking at the background and then geolocating them. That could be very significant, during the lead up to a war or other tensions, say in the Taiwan area. And also he talks about, they talk about Russian disinformation and election interference and efforts by North Korea, which is actually surprisingly sophisticated in its cyber warfare capabilities. Despite being an impoverished country, they do have a significant investment in cybersecurity, in cyber warfare and that sort of business, right? As well as organized crime, financial fraud, etc., to bolster their economy. And of course, there's also Iran, which is a major nuisance in the Middle East for the US and its allies. So this is another very important book. It also has got a lot of tips about how people should defend themselves against hacking and spying. It talks about backdoors. It talks about certain software that you shouldn't use. The authors, in fact, advocate banning TikTok and Zoom effective immediately. They also advocate for the establishment of a dedicated cabinet-level cybersecurity position and agency. So an agency dedicated just to securing America's infrastructure, and also engaging in both defensive and offensive operations as warranted. So the US is really kind of behind the curve in many ways, but luckily, more recently, they've started to catch up and get their act together. So that's going to require a bipartisan commitment, but that is a thing that can be done because the US is already starting to do that, especially with microchips and bringing back the infrastructure for microchip manufacturing for the most advanced microchips. So this is certainly something that the US is starting to do, although probably not as quickly as it needs to. Next one, please. This is important. It's actually a book-length document. It's about 300 pages long. It's from the RAND Corporation, which does major geopolitical and other sort of studies for the government and the IC. Hostile social manipulation. So this is talking about how countries like Russia and China, but also, as I mentioned, Iran and North Korea, use cyber tools to try to deepen divisions in American society, and also the West more generally, to destabilize democracy and to sort of bring everyone into this kind of post-truth environment where nobody knows what's true or not. So in other words, nobody knows whether what they hear from the government is true, and they just think that everything is equally valid and that maybe there's no truth at all. So this document talks about the history of some of that and some of the social media platforms that have been used, like Twitter, which is really kind of troubling because Twitter is run by a man-child who increasingly seems to support Russia and sides with the far right. So, some people might think, oh, this is to do with the Democrats versus Republicans, but it's actually not the case because many Republicans oppose these more outlandish statements by Trump and others to do with statements that they've made, which are clearly fake. But there's also like the MAGA contingent within the GOP, which seemingly is holding the GOP hostage right now. Hopefully that's going to change. But this is really something that affects all Americans and all people in the free world, is to understand the ways that enemies of democracy use these tools to try to undermine democratic order. Next one, please. This is a kind of disturbing article, actually, in Foreign Affairs. It talks about how the Chinese regime is suppressing the Uyghur population using digital dictatorship. So China is really perfecting the tools of surveillance and monitoring and keeping tabs on people and who they talk to, using AI algorithms to do this increasingly. And, when the internet started becoming a thing that people could just use to share information, people were very optimistic that it would bring in an era of global democracy because it would become impossible for authoritarian regimes to hide things from their people. But in reality, these tools are being used more and more by those very regimes to cement their control. So in China, for example, you've got this mass surveillance state, which is just as sinister as anything in an Orwellian novel. And it actually frees up a lot of resources that the state can then use to do other things. So just the knowledge that you're being monitored, that your communications are being tracked, is enough in many cases to prevent or to deter people from saying anything that might be taken as anti-government. So technology is very much a double-edged sword in this whole arena. So there's kind of a terrifying thing going on in the Xinjiang province in China, where the regime is suppressing and arguably committing a genocide against the Uyghur Muslim minority. It's actually, I think it's a majority there in that province, but the Muslims are still a minority within China as a whole. But this model that they're using would apply to all of China because they're starting to kind of integrate and coordinate their efforts on a nationwide basis to suppress the entire population and keep everybody under tabs. They also sell these tools to other authoritarian regimes. So it's starting to be kind of a major revenue stream for them, but it's also ideologically a weapon that they yield against the free world. And I think these authors or somebody else, maybe one of the previous documents, mention a kind of authoritarian axis, which is the countries which are opposed to liberal democracy and are, to an extent, coordinating their efforts to undermine American hegemony and the Western dominated world order. Next one. This is an article not so much about cyber, but about China's threat to global democracy, although it still very much overlaps with the cyber aspect. So this is from the Journal of Democracy, which keeps track of democratic news about democracies and democratic reforms and threats to democracy around the world. They've got many, many articles about China. This is a really, really good one. It talks about how China's foreign policy is not simply a pragmatic policy about getting investment opportunities or opening up markets worldwide for Chinese companies, etc. It's also about undermining democracy, which they view as an existential threat. So sometimes people think that the CCP views the US as a threat because one party or other is in control. It actually views the US per se as a threat because of America's social order, social system, which is a constitutional liberal democracy. That is the real threat to the Chinese regime, and they're very cognizant of that. So they are coordinating efforts with Russia and other authoritarian states to try to beat back the spread of democracy and even reverse that. So they want to spread authoritarianism. It's actually a very integral part of their foreign policy, which many people overlook. Yeah, so that's another good one to read. This is another very good article or paper. It's about Russia as a postmodernist dictatorship. So postmodernist because it's saying that Russia has really got no permanent ideology as such other than power, and that it kind of tries to foster this post-truth worldview where everything is just up for grabs in terms of its epistemological status. So in other words, there's no base truth. Everything is just subjective, and one news item could be as good as another based on how many people believe it. So they kind of do try to foster this idea where everybody is depoliticized, atomized, and where you make up your own reality. This is the reason that Russia actually will foster dubious claims of both the left and the right. It really doesn't matter to them. They could be pushing something that Black Lives Matter says, and they could be pushing something that the Proud Boys say, right? At the same time, it's just about creating division and making everybody confused and distrustful of the government, the US government, and the institutions of liberal democracy. So it's a kind of long-term project that they're doing. The reason that they do this is, first of all, because of their inherent opposition to liberal democracy, and also because they are at a disadvantage to the US and the West. The West is much more dynamic and powerful than Russia, despite appearances sometimes. But Russia tries to level the playing field by dragging the West down a notch, right? By injecting confusion and instability. And that's one of the weapons that they wield. Okay, so it's more about dragging other people down to make them more manageable. China also does this, by the way, of course. And the Soviet Union did this with its disinformation campaigns. for the same reasons. They were always at a disadvantage to the United States, technologically, financially, militarily, but they do have this weapon that they wield, and they use democracy in the West as a weapon against itself, because they know that Western countries will tolerate a lot of this disinformation because of freedom of speech protections, and so they try to exploit that for their own benefit. And I don't know if I had another slide. Oh yeah, Chip War. This is a very good book which came out quite recently. It's about the current global struggle over the manufacture of the most advanced microchips. Now, many people might not know that the most advanced microchips in the world are made in Taiwan, which China claims as a province of its own country. Taiwan is a de facto free country with its own government and military, but it's never officially declared independence because of fear that that would trigger a Chinese invasion. Although China does regularly attack Taiwan with cyber attacks and hacking and things of that sort, but it hasn't outright invaded Taiwan, at least not yet. There are fears that it will do so very soon, and questions about whether the US will step up and defend Taiwan if needed. So the global struggle over chips is a very important aspect of the current global economy, because chips are increasingly used for many applications, including artificial intelligence, which is becoming more of a thing, and many other applications. US is starting to move back a lot of the most advanced chip manufacturing to America. So the Taiwanese companies which make the most advanced chips are actually setting up some manufacturing plants in the US. And Intel as well is starting to, which is an American company, but it's also kind of getting its act together. So this is also another important aspect to keep track of. And it's going to be an increasing part of the geopolitical tensions going into the next decade. And I think that was it.
Were there wonders in the sky? Before today, in 2010, Chris Aubeck and Jack Valet published their wondrous work, Wonders in the Wily Sky, the name I just made up for a book that's actually called Wonders in the Sky, Unexplained Aerial Objects from Antiquity to Modern Times. In it, they curate 500 historical accounts from the dawn of written history all the way up to the year 1879, almost a mere 150 years ago. The work full of fascinating accounts of celestial prodigies, otherworldly beings, and strange objects from heaven in the ancient world, and in the not so ancient but also not quite contemporary world. I love this book, but I'm going to say right up front that it also comes with some major issues. Please note that I am not an expert in these topics, but that being said, this book should not be read as a rigorous scientific study. Jacques Vallée is a veteran UFO researcher who everyone listening to this show is probably already aware of. He's written many books on the topic, and we could easily do a whole episode just on the controversial things he's said in the past few years. Chris Aubeck is a scholar of pre-modern accounts of UFOs and aliens, and he also founded the Magonia Exchange, a private online group that collects pre-modern reports resembling modern UFO-associated reports. Wonders in the Sky is not the only book he's published on this sort of topic, nor is it the last. In 2023, he published a whole book on the history and prehistory of saucers. And while I have not read it, I certainly will. Wonders in the Sky is by no means the first time that UFO researchers sat down to connect ancient reports to modern UFO reports. As ancient astronaut theorists suggest, in fact, not even ancient astronaut theorists suggest this, since Eric von Daniken, Louis Pauwels, excuse my pronunciation, Jacques Berger, and others were already theorizing about ancient aliens long before Giorgio Tsoukalos was ever conceived by aliens. Vallée himself was writing about this topic in his book Passport to Magonia back in the 1960s. Wonders in the Sky even cites UFOs over Ancient Rome, published by Walter Raymond Drake in Raymond Palmer's magazine Flying Saucers, back in 1964. Tip of the beanie to Jeff Knox for providing me this article. In short, people have been talking about UFOs for a very long time. But Wonders in the Sky does position itself as a work that has something substantial to add to the paleo-UFO discourse by rigorously examining and analyzing the data. It even has charts and graphs. It comes with a lovely foreword by the great David Hufford, a psychiatric researcher who used folkloristics to identify the universal experience of finding oneself paralyzed in bed, often only to be harassed by any manner of terrifying monster or phantasm, aka the sleep paralysis experience. Hufford has only kind things to say about this work. He writes, quote, "The work of Jacques Vallée and Chris Aubeck is especially steadfast and courageous in two respects. While seeking a core phenomenology that requires the stripping away of layers of cultural elaboration, they nonetheless systematically attend to the data. After they have removed spaceship as a core feature of an observation, they do not proceed to remove all anomalous features. The problem with spaceship is not that it is anomalous, it is that it is an interpretation rather than an observation. This is true open-mindedness, and it suggests that we are seeking to understand aspects of the world that are deeply strange," unquote. But as I think you'll see, I don't really agree with this sentiment. In the introduction, they're generally conservative in their observations about fantastic aerial phenomena, but the further one progresses in the work, the more apparent it becomes that they are viewing pre-UFO reports through the lens of modern UFO culture. But even in the introduction, we can see their biases tucked only a little under the cuff. For example, they write, quote, "Although many details of these events have been forgotten or pushed under the colorful rug of history, their impact has shaped human civilization in important ways," unquote. Oh, what? That's not the right slide. Oh, yes, it is. Okay. Nowhere in this book do we find clear evidence that aerial phenomena have impacted human societies in a direct causal way, though, at least not one that can be meaningfully described, what with the scant historical evidence that most of these reports come with. That being said, the reports that follow are worth reading, regardless of what one believes about UFOs. Many of the reports are really just essential to know about if you have an interest in the topic. For example, they include the story that gives us Passport to Magonia's namesake. This is a report made in 815 by Agobard, Archbishop of Lyon, in his work on hailstones and thunder. Here we see a specific historical event that deals with Tempestarii, legendary magi able to control the weather, who launch in cloud ships from a strange land called Magonia. I would love to talk about Agobar's report sometime because it's really fun and certainly UFO adjacent. The authors also include the holy cows that are the Nuremberg and Basel broadsheets. I talked about these at length in episode 3 of the UFO Detox Hour in a segment about dancing orbs of dusk and dawn. The authors made the choice not to include reports of strange lights or objects to not only include reports of strange lights or objects in the sky, but also, as we can see in the case of the Tempestarii, aerial entities and communication or even abduction by said entities. For example, in this fascinating case that reminds me a little bit of the Betz sphere, a man sees a fiery object fall from the sky, and as it turns out, it's a beetle, a sacred stone that allows you to communicate with whatever god that stone belongs to. In this case, the stone is perfectly spherical. It can change color and size, and it can communicate somehow. We can clearly interpret this story in the religious context of its time, and like many of the accounts in this book, there's very little reason to suppose that the event actually happened as recounted. Some other accounts probably should not have been included in the book at all, like, for example, this account of the pharaoh Akhenaten. Akhenaten ruled Egypt in the mid-1300s BCE during the 18th dynasty of the Egyptian Empire. The authors write, quote, "According to inscriptions on the frontier stelae found on the circumference of El Amarna, Akhenaten was strolling along the river, admiring the splendors of nature one summer morning, when he looked up and saw a shining disk descend from the sky. He heard the voice of the solar disk itself tell him that he was to build a new capital for Egypt and give it the name Akhetaten, the horizon of the solar disk. During the time of Amenophis IV, or Akhenaten, Egypt's capital became the city of Akhetaten. The ideographic symbol for the word horizon was a disk floating over a mountain range." Unquote. But doing some perfunctory research for this piece, I was unable to find any reference of this supposed vision that the authors describe. I looked at the source that they used, Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, Revolution and Restoration by David Silverman, Joseph Wegner, and Jennifer Wegner, but I only found this Stella passage. Quote, "On this day, one was in Akhenaten, when His Majesty, Akhenaten, appeared on the great chariot of Electrum, just like the Aten, when he rises in the horizon and fills the land with his love, he having made a good journey to Akhetaten, his place of the primeval event, which he made for himself, his horizon, in which his circuit comes into being, where he is beheld with joy, while the land rejoices and all hearts exult when they see him." Unquote. These accounts are different from each other, and I was unable to find any instance of shining or disk in the entirety of this reference. The word Aten being used here does translate to disk, but in this context, it's clear that what's being described is the sun, which was worshipped by Akhenaten and his family. Not only that, but there isn't even any mention of the Aten being present at this event, let alone the other details of Abek's and Valet's account. If anyone has any knowledge about this particular vision that Abek and Valet describe, please let me know. I would be interested in finding it. I mean that sincerely. The authors state explicitly that they excluded accounts of otherworldly beings, and the authors of Wonder in the Sky, by the way, explicitly state that they excluded accounts of otherworldly beings and strange entities if there was nothing aerial involved. No flying, it's a problem. There's a good chance it has nothing to do with UFOs. Yet they still included this very brief account of Isabel Haldane. Haldane claimed that she... What's going on here? I think I did this wrong. Haldane claimed that she gained her witchy powers after she was abducted through her bedroom window and taken inside of a hill, quote, whether by God or the devil, she knows not, unquote. She was in the fairy realm under the earth for 3 days before a man with a gray beard brought her out again. We might suppose that Haldane was flown out of her room and to the hill, but there is no direct mention in this account that she was taken by air or levitated. It could just be that the fairies, or Glob knows what, just dragged her out of her bed and took her on foot. It's not as though she was living in a high-rise apartment or even a castle. And after all, she wasn't taken into space or heaven, she was taken into a hill that opened up. We can, of course, set any problematic cases like this aside and suppose that at least some of the reports that Aubeck and Vallée collected are at least reliable enough that they fit the parameters that they set out with. I only reread a few of them for this piece, so it could even be that most of the accounts are good enough. But are the conclusions that Aubeck and Vallée drawing objective and reasonable? Quote, the fact that witnesses perceived transcendent images in the phenomena may be part of the mechanism of the phenomena, unquote. I suppose that's true depending on what one means by the phenomena. But couldn't it also just be the case that the witnesses perceived transcendent images that had no connection to actual aerial objects? Or even just that they saw something fantastic looking, like a fireball or a display of sundogs, and on seeing this, they then felt transcendence. In other words, couldn't the transcendent part have nothing at all to do with what they saw beyond the fact that they couldn't understand it and it looked incredible? I suppose that what the authors could have meant is that the quote-unquote phenomena include not just strange things in the sky, but also people's innate tendency to have transcendent experiences. But what about all the transcendent experiences that happen without seeing something in the sky? If the quote-unquote phenomena that they ambiguously refer to include only transcendent experiences that happen to result from seeing something unexplained in the sky, then this category of phenomena is arbitrary. Why even exclude accounts of entities from the sea or entities from the ground if there is nothing to suggest that the transcendent or uncanny aspects of these accounts are in any way fundamentally different from the same sorts of aspects of aerial reports? What do Aubeck and Vallée even mean when they refer to the phenomena? Which phenomena are we talking about here? UFO phenomena? Quote, given the preponderance of multiple witness cases and the many events attested by figures and authorities such as astronomers, state or church representatives, as well as the 331 extensive investigations some of the events have triggered, it is not reasonable to claim that no physical phenomenon of an unusual nature was present, unquote. But is this really the case? By their own account, there are far more recorded sightings of strange things in the sky after 1880 than in all of history before then. As they rightly point out, this probably has a lot to do with improvements in printing technology, but the vast majority of sightings in the last 150 years can be explained by conventional phenomena. And ancient people didn't have explanations for many of the meteorological phenomena that we now know of today, like meteors, sun halos, and auroras. Ancient writers were also likely more motivated to distort sightings on the basis of religious beliefs and desires, while they were not typically held to standards of accurate reporting. Agobar probably didn't have to worry much about academic rigor or standards of evidence, at least not to the extent that equivalent authorities today might, and he was very skeptical. So it seems more reasonable to conclude that the sightings gathered are not a reliable indicator of unexplained phenomena, let alone some cohesive, easily defined set of phenomena distinct from other categories of phenomena. Yet Aubeck and Vallée then write, quote, All these indications converge to support the concept of an unrecognized physical phenomenon that is relatively rare and unpredictable, but consistent in its general appearance and effects, unquote. But doesn't the evidence that they've gathered actually indicate just the opposite? Neither are the sightings consistent in general appearance, nor are they an indication of a consistent phenomenon. Indeed, fantastic reports of real celestial phenomena do get recorded in ancient records. For example, modern scientists were able to date a remnant of a supernova, a star that exploded, to the year 185. What's going on here? Okay, I screwed up the slides. I'm sorry about that. They did this in part by using ancient Chinese astronomical records of the event. In 1195, the Benedictine monk and chronicler Gervase of Canterbury reported a fiery globe that emerged from a cloud over the Thames. In 2022, researchers published a paper in the journal Weather that proposed that Gervase was describing an actual occurrence of ball lightning. Did he, though? This seems really likely to me, but I think we should still remain a little skeptical. He could have witnessed some other natural meteorological occurrence. We might never know, not at least until a holotype of ball lightning is reliably physically documented. Wonders in the Sky might even contain one or more records of actual preternatural phenomena. But if it does, there's no way to know for sure. The book doesn't demonstrate anything new, but it does make various ambiguous and suggestive claims. That being said, it's still a wonderful book that clearly had a lot of work behind it. I absolutely respect it for that. I would recommend it to anyone, just with some big caveats. Okay, so hey.
Yeah, I've got my copy too, with a little coin that it brought.
Yeah,
That's like collector's edition.
You've got the collector's one too?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. The Indiegogo one, it's in like a box thing. It's got like some art and the little metal coin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I got it.
He's somewhere hiding.
But as Rachel mentions, you should take it with a caveat.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess according to this, I'm wrong today, because it says right here, I just noticed, December 15th, 1813, first congressional hearings. So it wasn't April 5th, 1966. It apparently was in 1813. They had these little hearings on some blue lights that were seen during the American War against England. And that are in the Proceedings of Congress, House of Representatives for 1818. Yeah, it's right before the two Joseph Smith entries. So
I need to go back through and actually read the entire book again, probably multiple times, because I've read it in the past, but that's what I would have really liked to do for this piece. But
at least whatever you think about the results, the one benefit is that they put their sources in here, so you can at least track back down and look at the original material. Not all catalogs are good at doing that. After just discussing on Twitter how the humanoid catalogs that Rosales, Alberto Rosales, I think his name is, put out, a lot of them just like they don't even have sources for like the entries. Like there's no way to look up like where the cases originally came from. And I got to give it to these guys that at least properly list their sources.
Yeah, that's a good book.
Pull it up.
Are there any statistical analyses in the book about like the shapes of supposed craft or whatever, things like that, trends through time?
There's
and they've got like charts like time of day, frequency of cases, duration statistics, by period. Like 12th century, 13th century, so they've got like charts and stuff in the back.
Yeah, there was and actually some of them are pretty informative. Like there's one where they track time of year by like month, and
or like, they have different points through each month. So it's like, I don't know, maybe like 52 points or something like that. And they're trying to see if there's any correlation with the meteor showers. And they don't really find any except for with the Perseids. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's other good books like Chris Auerbach. I think he did a book with Martin Shaw, maybe. There's a book called Return to Magonia, which is kind of another book like that. And then there's these books, Redemption of the Damned, like volumes 1 and 2. And what they did is they went and looked at like the cases that Fort had in his books, and then looked up the original source material and pulled like a lot more detail on the cases and kind of reinvestigated them pretty thoroughly. They're actually pretty fantastic books. Like if you're interested in like early pre-UFO sightings, the stuff before the modern UFO era.
Yeah, no, I have to spend more time with Auerbach. I really want to read that most recent book that he published.
Yeah,
too.
Saucers. Yeah, so do I. He sent me over like a sample of the beginning of like the book to like check out, but I have not had a chance to actually read it. Like I mentioned, I've been on a book buying hiatus, for budgetary reasons, but I would like to read it. I've read reviews of it, and it sounds like it comes to some of the same conclusions many of us have done. Like the saucers, was, in the newspapers long before flying saucers. It referred to skeet shooting. Like that's what, so you can actually find articles like from like 1910, for example, talking about saucers, flying saucers, but they're referring to the skeet shooting is what they used to call those. So, and I believe he mentions that. He talks about it at the very beginning of the book, but I would love to read that book.
There's an early Japanese cartoon that has this. It's like the Animal Olympics, and there's a part where an elephant competes in a discus throwing, and the discus like acts very much like a flying saucer, and it looks like a flying saucer because it's disc shaped, but
yeah.
It's funny, but it's also interesting to look at through that lens. That's from like the 1920s or something like that.
Well, and flying saucers as space vehicles like go back to pulp artwork to at least the 1910s, because I found that I posted to Twitter pictures of saucers from like Modern Mechanics, like Hugo Gernsback's publication back then in like 1912 or something. So like the idea of a saucer shaped vehicle as like a spacecraft like has existed in like the pulp literature long before 1947.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And by the way, Jeff, when you showed Hynek's picture, he was showing up, he was holding up one of the Adamski sources. Is that an actual photo? And what's the context of that? Like, was he promoting that photo as genuine or as an example of just a flying saucer?
That's actually kind of an interesting story, right? So it actually kind of, I guess, irritated him a little bit because people got the idea that he was presenting these bunk photos and trying to associate the swamp gas sightings with the Adamski contactees, which is nonsense. And so he was saying it was all nonsense, but it wasn't actually his photo at all. It was the guy sitting in front of him. One of the reporters had it with him, and he shoved it in Hynek's hand. And you can, if we could have played the video of the press conference, you could have seen that. But I did link to it on my thread last night. But yeah, you can actually see the guy shoving the photo in his hand, asking him about it. And Hynek is basically just like, it looks like a chicken feeder. And but of course that's the picture they took, and that went around the world in all the newspapers, was him holding up Adamski's photo, saying he's calling saucer swamp gas, and that kind of added to the controversy because they thought he was trying to associate those sightings with the wacky contactees, when that was the reporter. That wasn't even him. It wasn't his photo at all. So yeah.
All right. Should we close out?
Yeah, I think
Sure.
that's good.
All righty. Oh, jeez. And for our final story, Newsweek published an article that defies all rational explanation. As though in defiance of the very laws of nature, Newsweek published an article on Friday entitled Joe Rogan suggests UFOs, drug use are in the Bible. Much of the article is spent quoting a passage from the book of Ezekiel, which describes a vision of the Hebrew god Yahweh flying on his chariot in the sky. Aside from this, the article also somewhat focuses on an interview Joe Rogan conducted with respected documentarian David Holthaus. Joe Rogan is a podcaster or something. How and why David Holthaus agreed to do this interview is currently unexplained by scientific experts. Speaking on the topic of humanoid aliens, Joe Rogan asked Holthaus in his interview, quote, "Why is this thing so much like us, this shitty design of walking around on two people," unquote. At which point he responded to his own question for several minutes on end. His response to his own question consisted of uncanny speculations about human evolution, attempting through a string of preternatural words to support his unexplained thoughts with talk about Bob Lazar back engineering alien technology. Bob Lazar is a noted blah 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 blah. The entire interview with Holthaus is posted at the very top of the Newsweek interview with Holthaus. The entire interview with Holthaus is posted at the very top of the Newsweek article, precluding any need for the article in the first place, for reasons that are entirely mysterious to modern science. In attempting to understand this deep conundrum, because we didn't listen to the interview, Ufos contacted Bigfoot, associate professor of sundew watching at the University of Bog, and asked him about it, and he said, quote, "In my professional opinion, there is absolutely no reason why the public should care about anything that Joe Rogan says. I listened to him talk for like 5 minutes, and I thought he was just making word salad. How or why Newsweek would publish something like this is, from a research standpoint, a real anomaly. It could take your human scientists centuries to understand. This could be the greatest scientific mystery of our time," unquote. We replied, quote, "Thank you so much for your thoughtful reply," unquote. Bigfoot was very cordial and we enjoyed the conversation. Before we go, if you enjoy this show, we would like you to please consider subscribing to our channel, Ufo Sunset. Please also hit the like button and hit the notification bell icon if you'd like to get notified about upcoming videos. And come and join our cozy and intimate live chat. A great plus for joining the live chat is that you can give us constructive feedback live on the air, especially if we make any factual errors. You can also join our Discord, a temporary link to which can be found in the episode description. Please be sure to check out our respective content. I can be found at the Earth YouTube channel. All of the videos there were made by me and not by the fictional character dhruvchandna. Visit Luis Cayetano's website, ufologyiscorrupt.com. And you can find Jeff Knox's daily posts on history and the science of UFOs on Twitter or Facebook. He was also just interviewed last week on Truth Seekers with host Stephen Cambion. You may have heard of him. He's kind of a big deal. It was a great show, and Cambion did a wonderful interview. Jeff Knox spends all of his time studying UFOs, and he doesn't make any money off of it. Please consider visiting his Patreon page and becoming his patron. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Lise. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Everyone have a good eclipse day. If you think the world's ending, just wait a couple minutes and it'll be fine.
Oh, also shout out to Stephanie Quick, who's always supporting me on Twitter. Stephanie, great person, very intelligent. I also recommend her her YouTube channel as well.
So, are any of you guys? Are you going to be able to see the eclipse at all, Louise? Where you're at?
I don't think so. No.
Are we, Rachel?
No, no. I think that it's like at 20% where we're at.
Yeah, it's a shame. I saw the big one in 2017, but not gonna miss this one. Oh well. All right.
All righty. Have a good night.
Was fun.
See ya.
Everybody have a good Sunday.